Hello everyone. So in this video, we will see how you can build a real-time counter application using Appwrite and Flutter. We are also going to use Riverpod as a state management tool, and we'll see how Riverpod provides us an easy way to manage our state in Flutter. So for everyone who don't know what Appwrite is, well, Appwrite is an amazing backend platform for developing web and mobile applications. It is an open source tool which has different features such as authentication, database, function, storage, etc. So if you wish to know more about Appwrite, you can head over to appwrite.io. So let's get started. I have a project created in Flutter and it's up and running. It's the basic counter application. Well, this video doesn't require you to have any prior knowledge of Appwrite or Riverpod, but at least you should have a basic knowledge of Flutter. Like, at least you should know how this counter application works, because we will be removing this counter code and we'll be integrating it with our Appwrite database. So this is the basic project that comes pre-built with Flutter. And as you can see, as you increment this button, the value of the counter increases. Now what we have to do is connect this counter value to our Appwrite database and make it a real-time database, or use the Realtime API, so that if there are many applications or many users using the same data or seeing the same data, they can see the changes in real time. So before doing that, let's configure our Appwrite project. So I have Appwrite locally installed on my system using Docker. So if I just go to my localhost, I can log into my Appwrite console, and as you can see, this is my Appwrite console. Let's create a new project and let's name it Riverpod Realtime. So once you create your application, you need to add a platform. So you can add different platforms like web application, your iOS application or Android application. Since we are using Flutter, we are going to add Flutter application, and this needs the name of my Android application. So let's name it my Android app, and it also needs the package name. So let's just get our package name from Android app, and if we scroll down, here is my package name. So let's just copy this and paste it over here. So if I click on next, this shows us how you can set up Appwrite, and we will do all of these stuff, but let's just add this platform. So yeah, so we have added our platform, we have added our Android application. Now you can see there is a section of database where you can create your database, right? So let's just create a basic schema to hold a counter value. So if I click on create database, I need to give it a name of my database. So let's just name it mydb. And if you need to provide it a custom ID, just enter some ID or leave it to if you want to generate one randomly. So I will leave it empty and click on create. So my database is created and I need to create a collection. So let's just name it counter collection and click on create. So my collection is created. Now before I can create a document, I need to create an attribute. So the value of my counter would be an integer. So I would be creating an integer attribute. Let's just name it counter, and it won't have a minimum size, or let's say it's have a minimum size of 0. And let's just not give it a maximum size, and it would be a required variable. Now let's just create our first document. So to create a first document, I need to give it an initial value. Let's give it an initial value of 0 and click on create. So as we are not going to use authentication in this project, so if you go to your settings, so just in the permission section, you can just click on that anyone can create, read, update or delete this document, or delete documents in this collection. So just update the permissions, and now we have our basic database schema ready. Let's just head over to a Flutter app. So first we need to add Appwrite as a dependency. So you can just type the command flutter pub add Appwrite. So this will install Appwrite as a dependency, and if you go to your pubspec.yaml file, you can see Appwrite is added as a dependency. So now to make things simple, I would be creating a Appwrite constant file. So let's name it, the first file would be Appwrite config file, and I also need one constants file where I would be storing all my project ID, database ID, collection ID. so that I can access them from anywhere in my project. So I have my constants ID, and let's just create a few constants. So this would be a constant, right? So I need some more constants. Let's say first off is my project ID, then I would have my DB ID, that is my database ID, and also my collection ID, and also my document ID. So if you go to our Appwrite console, and you can see that this is your project ID, so just copy this and paste it here. And if you go to your database, this is your database ID, and this is your collection ID, and this is your particular document ID. So let's just add constant instead of final. Alright, so we have a constants ready. Now we are also going to create an Appwrite class, so that we can easily access our clients. Like, to use Appwrite, you need to create a client object which have the project ID and endpoint set up. So to access that easily, you can create an Appwrite class. So import Appwrite. Now you need to create an class name as Appwrite, and this would have a static variable. Now if you don't know what a static variable is, basically static variables are variables in a class which are constants to the class itself and not unique to every instance of that class which is being created. Like, they're only created once in the memory. So it would be a constructor, so I can just call this method. So since Appwrite.instance isn't created, let's create Appwrite.instance. Now let's create a client variable which would be exposed so that we can access this client to communicate with our database. And now this is where we can set up our client. So you can just call client dot set endpoint. So the first thing that we need to set up is our endpoint. Well, we can also add this endpoint in our constants. So let's just do that. So what should be my endpoint? So basically I'm accessing my Appwrite server at my localhost. So it should be localhost, but since I would be using my emulator to make requests to my Appwrite server which is on localhost, this Appwrite server needs its own database, or it needs its own endpoint. So instead of just typing localhost, I would be providing it the IP address of my host machine. So where you can get this is if you go inside your terminal and on a Windows machine, if you type ipconfig, you will see this IPv4 address, which is the IP address of your local host machine. So I need to provide this IP address as the endpoint, so that even if I'm making calls from my emulator, it gets access to my Appwrite server. So this is the endpoint, and at the last we need to provide v1. This is the endpoint, and let's just import the constants file. So we can import constants.dart as a constant. So how you can access it? You can just use constant.endpoint. Now the next thing is that we need to set the project ID. So you can just use constant project ID. You also need to set the self assign, so you can just set it to true. Now it says that this expression doesn't evaluate to a function because we are missing an underscore, and that looks good. We can now use this Appwrite class or this instance to we can use this client object or this client variable to make calls to our Appwrite server. Now what we can do is let's just try connecting to our database, and before that I can just close this terminal because I don't need this. Well, if you go to the official documentation of Appwrite, so this is the official documentation. If I go to my docs, and this is the real-time API, like there are REST APIs, GraphQL and real-time API. So you can see how should you use your real-time APIs. So basically you need to subscribe to a channel and then get all the updates related to that channel. So you can basically get the events, channels, timestamp and payload. Well, payload is all that data which we would get from our database, and these are all the list of channels that we can subscribe to. So basically you can subscribe to an account or a particular document, like all the documents in a collection, all the documents, a particular document in a particular collection which is present in a database, all the files, buckets, like basically every service that you have on your Appwrite server, you can subscribe to that event and listen to it in real time. So how we can do is, you can see if I just select Flutter as my platform, you can see I need to subscribe to this channel and then provide the channel as a string, and then I can just subscribe and listen to that stream, which will give me the response. Well, this sounds good. Now let's just remove this boilerplate code. Okay, we don't need this. This is my home page. We would be creating our own home page, so let's just create a stateful widget and name it my home page, and it will return us scaffold. In the body it would have a child, okay, so it's good for, and let's remove all these comments. So let's just run our application to see if it runs, and if we reload our app, you can see I'm getting this hello world. Now what I need to do is access the database. Right now, how can I get the value of the database? Well, let's go again to my console, to my official documentation, and if you look at databases, you can see you can either create, but we have created a document. We don't need to create a document, we just need to read the document and update the document. So this is the section of get document. You can see you can just simply call databases.get document and provide the database ID, collection ID and document ID. To update the document, you need to call this function as update document. Alright, so what we can do is, I guess you might have seen that we need to create a database object before we can access the database. So if I just select my Flutter SDK and copy this command to create my database object, so in my home page I can basically do this, and let's just import it from my Appwrite, and it needs the value of client. So from where would I get this client? I would get this client from Appwrite instance. So let's get this. So call Appwrite and dot instance dot client, right? So because this database basically needs a client, and if you just go, you can see this is the client which we have initiated. So let's just try to get a document as soon as my app gets built. So what I can do is I can just print databases.get document, and I need to provide a database ID, collection ID, and document ID. So all of these things are present in my constants. So let's just import my constants file. Okay, constants, right? So my database ID is constants.dbid. My collection ID is constants.collection ID, and my document ID is constants.doc ID. So let's see what we get in our console. Okay, so we are getting an error which says no implementation found for the method get application. So let's just close our app and restart it, because we have added a new dependency. So it might be the case that it's giving us the error. And let's see if we missed anything. Like, we have created a database instance and we are calling this database.get document by passing it the database ID, collection ID, and my document ID. So yeah, now my app is up and running, and you can see in my instance that I'm getting a future document. Now because this returns a future document, as you can see. Now how do I get access to that? Well, instead of using .get document, I can just remove this print statement, and I can call .then method, which would then print the value which I'm getting. So in this way, once my document gets loaded from my server, after that it will print whatever the response I'm getting. So instead of value.data, let's just get the value which we are getting using this get document. So if I try to reload my application, so it gives me an instance of document. Now what I need is the data of that document. So if I reload my application, you can see like I'm getting my document which is having the value of counter, and which is having a document ID and some more attributes like created at, updated at, the permissions, and database ID and collection ID. So we are able to get a document. Now we need to subscribe so that we can view, but there is one issue with this, is that this is not a real-time API. Like every time the data gets updated in the server, the screen needs to be rebuilt, or the app needs to be restarted, or this get document needs to be recalled, or it needs to recall the server to get the data, which can increase your network calls and slow down your application. Like you need to have an instance access to whatever real-time application you're building. Let's say a chat application. As soon as someone sends a chat, you need the receiver to instantly receive that chat. So for that, we have our real-time API. Now how to use the real-time API? So for that, let's create a variable by providing it the real-time. So this is also a class which is present in Appwrite. And where do I get this? Is if you go to this real-time API and select Flutter application, you will see you also need to create an object of your real-time API. So similarly, it also needs access to a client. So let's give it an access to a client, and we also need to subscribe to this. So let's also create a subscription variable, and let's create a function called as sub, that means subscribe, in which we will be subscribing to this event. And as soon as my class is initiated, I need that this sub is called, or well, this is not needed. So what should I do in my sub? Okay, so let me just disable my Copilot so that I can explain what I'm doing. So you need to create a subscription, and this subscription would be like real-time dot, and you can see there is something known as subscribe, in which it takes a list of channels on which you can subscribe. So as you can see, it provides the possible channels are account, collection ID, documents. So in this case, I need to particularly listen to a document, so I can just select document, but instead of that I would be selecting that particular document, or I would be listening to that particular document which I have created in my database. So how I can do is, I can do databases dot. Now here I will be providing my database ID and my collections, databases dot collection, and here I would be providing my collection ID. Okay, and then documents, because inside the database, then collection, and then documents I would be providing my document ID. So this would particularly subscribe to my channel. And how you need to subscribe is, well, I need to use string interpolation to include these constants in my subscribe channel or the subscribe string. So I can just do, and inside your curly braces you can provide your database ID. Now I also need to provide my collection. So let's just copy this and paste it over here. So instead of database ID, it should be collection ID, and at last I need to provide my document ID. So it's the document ID. So this is the channel which we would be subscribing to, or let's say the particular document which we would be subscribing to. Now once we have subscribed to this, we need to get all the data. And how you can do that? So basically in Flutter, if you want to listen to a stream of data, what we use is something known as stream builder. So let me just remove this and show you what a stream builder is. So let's say if I remove my body and use a stream builder. So stream builder is basically used if you want to continuously listen to a stream of data, which is exactly what we are going to do in our real-time API. We are going to continuously listen to the data which is present in our database. So this stream builder basically takes two things, which is, first one is stream and the second is a builder. Like literally it takes the stream which it needs to listen, and once it listens to the stream, what it needs to be built, like what does it need to build, right? So let's just provide it. Let's first talk about this builder. So this builder basically takes two parameters. First one is context and the second is snapshot. So like if you have experience with Flutter, you know how stream builder works. So what we do is we check inside a snapshot, like if snapshot has some data, we do something, or let's say if snapshot has error, like we do something, and if snapshot dot connection state is double equal to connection state dot waiting, that means that the data is still in the process of getting fetched, we can print something, or we can show this data accordingly. And because this returns a widget, here you need to return a particular widget, right? So but what about the stream? This stream takes this is something that builds on the latest snapshot of that particular stream, so we need to provide it a string. So we have this stream, you can see, well, if you see now my subscription has a stream. Now we can return this stream so that we can listen to the data which is continuously getting streamed from my database. So let's just add this null check operator, and instead of returning a void, I can return a stream and add a return statement here. So my stream would be simply, I would be listening to this stream, and let's just remove this constant. right now. Makes sense. Like for my stream builder, this is my stream, and once I get my stream, I would be getting my data in terms of snapshot, and depending upon what the snapshot has to offer, like if it has data, if it has error, or if it has connection state, if it's currently in a state of loading, I would display my UI, right? Now let's just build our data, right? So if my connection has some data, so what I'm going to do is simply show that data. So inside my center widget, I'm having my text, and let's just show on the screen that data is present, right? Okay, this makes sense. Now let's say if due to some reason my snapshot doesn't have any data, so I can just present it with error loading data, and if it has a current state of connection state, I can just return a circular progress indicator. Simple. And just use constant. Okay, so this looks good, but what I'm getting here is that this body might complete normally, causing null to be returned. So there has to be a state. We should not be returning null. So let's just for the purpose let's remove this connection state and add it inside my else if statement. Well, now it should work fine. Okay, let's see the body. It is getting returned. There shouldn't be any issues. The snapshot has data, else no data. But so instead of else if, let's use else, and that's for any other scenarios. If it has data, show the data. If it doesn't have, or it's like if there is no data present currently, or you can't fetch any data, let's just show no data. Okay, so this works good, looks good, I would say. Let's just see if it works good as well or not. So if I just try to refresh this app, so I'm getting no data, but basically I have got some data. How do I know that? So you can see that inside your debug console you have got an WebSocket URL. So basically WebSocket is used when you need to have a real-time connection. So Appwrite creates a WebSocket URL or a WebSocket connection to communicate between your database and your project. So if you just copy this WebSocket and test if this WebSocket URL is working or not. So to test this WebSocket, I would be using Postman, and you can use basically any tool which you like. So if I go to my new WebSocket connection and just enter this URL and click on connect, you can see like my database is connected. Now how do I check that this WebSocket is working properly or not? Well, it is working properly because it is connected, but let's just see. So currently it has some data, you can see, and a particular channel is connected to it. Now when this database would change is when there is some change in my particular data. So let's just update this data. So if I click on update and if you go to your Postman, so you can see there is a new response which returns the change. So you can see that these are all the events that are getting triggered by the change in that database, and inside your payload you have the updated value and all the other attributes. So that means our WebSocket connection is working properly. So let's see how you can get your data, and as you can see now it's showing that data is present. Now we need to access that data, right? Other than what would be the use of that data? So let's just try to see what the snapshot has. So it says snapshot can be assigned, so let's just convert to it a string and remove my constant. So yeah, if you see at the snapshot, you will get all this payload data, which shows all the events that are getting triggered by that update in that document. And well, we don't need this. What we need is, you can see if you find, you can see something known as payload. So let's just try to access payload. So it's data, so let's just print data. Okay, so convert it to a string. Well, it shows basically the same thing. So let's get the payload and we'll convert the payload to string. So yeah, now my data is a little bit less cluttered and more trimmed. So you can see that this is the counter value which I need to access. So how I can access this? By simply calling its name, and because this is an integer, I need to convert it into a string. So you can see that I'm getting my counter value, and let's just increase its font to, let's say, 18. Okay. Let's say it's 20. All right. So how do I know that this is working properly? Now, if I go to my database and let's say I'm updating the value should get reflected to my mobile screen instantly. So if I update it to a 30, so you can see the value gets updated. Now, how do I know that this value would be propagated to every user using this database? Let's just create another application using the same database, and let's just run a web version of this application. So they will have two different clients. The one is on mobile, the other is on a web connection or a web platform, let's say. And if the value gets updated on both of these platforms, we can say that yep, the real-time connection is working. So let's just wait for my Chrome app to launch. So I have my Chrome app running, and it currently shows no data, like no shows. And like, just to show you that this happens in real time, so yeah, let me just update it to 50, and you can see instantly on my mobile and web platform the value gets updated. So if I update it to 100, like at both the places it's getting updated, right? No issue in that. So let me just close this. Well, like this is how it works, right? But instead of updating that data from my database, let's just create a button which would be incrementing this value. So this is my scaffold, and let's just create a floating action button. So my floating action button would be a column, because I need two buttons basically. So my first button is a floating action button, and this is my second button. So I have my two buttons, and let's just fix the alignment. Yep, so you can see I have my two buttons, and the first button would increase the value and the second button would reset the value to 0, right? So let's just give it a icon, add, and copy this thing below, and this would be a reset, right? So the first button would update the value and the second button would reset the value to 0. Now this obviously needs to get updated, right? So before we can update the value of this counter, we need to first get the value from the database, get the current value from the database, and then need to increment on that value. So what I can do is I can do databases dot get document and basically use constants dot dbid, and let's just minimize it a bit. Alright, so I have my constants. Now this is my collection ID, and let's just copy it here, place it here, and I have my document ID. Once I get my document, so it would get a value. Now once I get my document, I need to update the value. Well, this is not the best way to do it. Like the time where we are getting this value from the counter value from the database, we can just store it locally and then update. But let's just leave it for another video. And for this video, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to do this like every time I would be getting the document from the database and then updating the value. So all these things are same. So let me just copy this. Now for update document, you also see like you need to provide the updated data. So my updated data is that I need to update the value of my counter, and that updated value would be the current value which is currently present incremented by 1. Right? Makes sense? And let's just add commas to make it formatted better. So first I'm getting this document, and once I get my document, I'm using that value, the current value of that counter, and incrementing it by 1. Well, in the case of let's say this reset button, I don't need to get the value of that document. I just need to update that document to 0. So let's just copy this. And okay, why is it showing it an error? Okay, so instead of using the existing value, I just need to update the value to 0. So let's see if it works or not. So yeah, it works, and let's verify it again. So, and if I click on reset, the value gets reset to 0. And the fun part, like if I just run another Chrome application, and let's wait. Maybe I shouldn't have closed that program and just hot restarted it, but let's wait for my Chrome app to run. And then the next step to integrate Riverpod would be fairly simple. We'll see how Riverpod can decrease the complexity of writing a stream provider or the stream builder, and how automatically the state gets updated. So yeah, we have our web application ready, and you see if I'm updating my value from one application, it gets updated into my other application in real time. So you can just play around it. So yeah, this works, this totally works. So now everything is working. Like we have used our Realtime API and Stream Builder to basically subscribe to Appwrite's Realtime API and then update the value in real time. Then why do we need to use Riverpod as a state management? Well, if you go to Riverpod's documentation, so and just click on docs. Well, Riverpod has different types of provider for different types of use cases, out of which one of the provider is a stream provider. So if I go to my guides, or let's say providers, and you can see there is a stream provider which is similar to the future provider, but for streams instead of future. Like it's similar to stream builder, but you can do it using Riverpod state management. And instead of going to a documentation, like you should follow this documentation to more about how stream provider works. Like you can see basically it can listen to Firebase or WebSockets, and basically we are listening to WebSockets in our using Appwrite's Realtime API. So let's just see how you can implement the same thing using Riverpod state management. So I can just add Flutter Riverpod as a dependency. So if I go to my pubspec.yaml, you can see I have my Flutter Riverpod as a dependency. And before creating any kinds of, before using Riverpod, I need to create a provider. So let's just create a file, provider.dart, and import Flutter Riverpod, and this would also help us to manage our code more efficiently, because you saw that everything I'm doing is I'm creating a subscription, I'm creating a real-time API, everything is present in my homepage widget, and in my stream builder I have to manage all of these state manually. Like I have to create dot has data, dot has error, dot is connection state. Everything I need to do is on my own, but we'll see how Riverpod handles everything for you, and it automatically updates the state. So, and what else we need? We also need Appwrite, because we will be creating a stream here itself. And let's just create a stream. So we'll name our stream as counter stream, like name a provider, and this would be of the type stream provider. Like as I said, Riverpod provides different kinds of provider for different use cases, and for listening to streams we have something as stream provider. And if you want to listen to something known as if you want to call the API and then get the data, you will use something as future provider. So I would be using stream provider. And if you have used Riverpod before, you know what this ref means. For everyone who doesn't know, ref is basically, it is used to access providers from anywhere into a Flutter app. So like basically Riverpod allows you to declare providers anywhere in your project, and you can just declare providers without creating a class. So to access that providers from anywhere in your project, you can use this ref. So now this needs to return something. Now obviously this would return a stream, so let's just create a stream first. So I have mine. Let's create a database object here itself. Well, we won't be needing our database object, right? So what we would be needing is a real-time API. So I have my real-time API, and it needs access to Appwrite's class. So Appwrite dot instance dot client, and let's quickly import this from our Appwrite config and close and just okay. So we have a real-time API, and let's create a real-time subscription, like similar to what we have done before, but we'll see how you can use your provider to return the value. So let's subscribe to our channel here itself, and let's just copy this subscription and paste it here. Also import your constants. Constants dot as constants. All right. Well, this looks good, and okay. Now we can use this subscription to return. We can return this subscription. So what I can do is return this subscription stream, but I need to return the value, or that integer value. So let me just return the integer value. Like I need to return the value of that counter. So you can see now this stream provider is an integer type stream provider. So what I can do is I can just use map, and this map gets all the event, and now my event has that value. So if I just do event.payload and get my value of my counter, now this would return my the value of my counter, right? Now I can directly use this counter string to access my value of my counter, but not exactly how you would be doing this. So we don't need this home page, or let's just remove this, but we would be needing a floating action button again, right? So I would be copying this floating action button and just paste into the new class which I would be creating. So let's just copy this floating action button, the content of this floating action button, and then remove my home page, and instead of just a stateful widget, what I would be creating is a stateful consumer widget, and let's name it my home page. And this is a consumer stateful widget. Well, you just need to import your Flutter Riverpod. Now, why I'm using this consumer stateful widget is because now I have access to this ref, which would like give me access to my providers from anywhere, right? So, well, how does this work is, now instead of returning a container, now I would be using this ref to watch my provider. So what does this watch does it? It returns the value exposed by provider. Now the name of my provider is counter stream. Now I get access to something known as when. So like this when has all of your state managed, like sorry. So like what should you do if you have a data, what should you do if you have error, what should you do if you have loading. So like it has automatically categorized every kind of scenarios. So let's just, like if I have my data, like obviously I will be getting this data, I would do something, right? Similar. Now if I have an error, now that error would have stack error and my stack trace, and I will then do something. And if it's in the loading state, then also I need to handle that. Now as you can see, it's more intuitive to handle all my states of my data as compared to my stream builder. Now if I just go here, I can return a scaffold directly, and in my center, okay, first my body center, in my center I have my child, and my child I would be displaying this text, and in this text I simply need to print my data. So as you see, if you hover over this data, you know that this data is going to be an integer because my provider is a stream provider of the type integer. Now this would always return an integer, and therefore my data is integer. So like if you change this integer to, let's say, string, you can see this data is now of the type string. So let's just reverse it, and I can just simply display my data, right? And let's also just add a font. Alright, so well, error and loading state are almost similar, so I can just copy this scaffold and paste it here. So either you can just display this error, or you can say error getting data. And so at the last, now instead of a text, let's just import a circular progress indicator and give it a const. No, that's what you need to do, that's all. And like if you compare it to my previous example, you see that my code is now much readable and much manageable, and my data is automatically getting, my state of my app or the state of my data is automatically handled by Riverpod. And like if there is an data, so in my scaffold I would just paste my floating action button code. Well, okay, I just need to create a database object so that I can update and reset the value. So let's just quickly do this. Appwrite.instance.client. Alright, so rest of the things are similar. So let's just run our application. And because I've added Riverpod, one more thing which I need to do is wrap my app class inside something known as provider scope. Now this provider scope will keep a watch on all the providers that are getting declared in this project, because providers can be created anywhere in my application. and let's restart this. So you can see I have a loading state, and if I go here and update the value, you can see now my value is getting updated. I can basically play with it. Now what happens if, like you saw that if the data is getting loaded, it's showing my circular progress indicator, and if my data is there, it's showing my data. What happens if it can't connect to my database? So let's say someone tampers with this URL and my app isn't able to connect to my database. So let's see if it gives an error or not. I'm getting an error over here that it's an unhandled exception. Well, that's a connection issue, but that basically is waiting to get connected, but it won't get connected anytime soon because my URL is wrong. Well, let's have something else. Let's say in my provider, count is not present. Let's try this. So it's still trying to connect, but at one point of time that value won't be it won't get that value, and after some time it would show me an error, and this condition would get fulfilled, that it will say that it's finding some error in getting data. So if I just replace this counter and try to reload, try to update it, yep, that works. Now if my stream or if my data can't be retrieved, so you will see this error which says error getting data, right? Makes sense, because there is no variable or no attribute as counter. There is a variable known as counter, but not as counters. Okay, so let's just reset it, rerun my app, and let's for the last time also run my Chrome application to see if it also works with my Riverpod implementation or not. So if I update the data to 0, yep, so I have my data. Let's just wait for my Chrome application to run, and then we can see if both the data gets synchronizes and changes in real time or not. Pick ones. Okay, I have my web application up and ready. Now it shows the loading state, and if I click on update, you can see like my data gets updated, and if I just click on reset, it gets changed automatically on my both platforms or both individual applications, right? So that's all for this video. I hope you got to learn something new on how to use Appwrite's Realtime API with Flutter. Firstly with using it with Stream Builder, and then replacing Stream Builder with Stream Provider, which is an provider provided by Riverpod, which made your code a bit more messy, maintainable, and it automatically handles all the state, right? So see you in the next video, and thank you.